Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm joined by a great friend, the Culture Matters podcast. Give tribute to Charlie Kirk. Before I introduce our guest, here's a quote just for this episode. The individual has always had to struggle from being overwhelmed by the crowd. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Friedrich Nietzsche. No price is too high for the privilege of owning yourself. Our guest today joins me after many episodes on the Culture Matters podcast to talk leadership, culture, business, and the like. Dr. David Yerkes, pay homage to our friend Charlie Kirk, father, husband, founder of a culture. Dr. Yerkes, thanks for coming on the Culture Matters podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Um, on that note, honor, it's an honor. Why? What was it about Charlie Kirk that has struck our culture at such great depths? Those of us that want to memorialize him, those that are listening that are within despair or inspired, somewhere in between, even those that may not be listening or have already tuned out because they thought it would be something else, you know, and maybe they don't want to hear something like this about someone like that, whatever that their perception was. What do you think it struck to the core of our culture? Or why is it an honor? Why are we talking about this? Man,
Well, I think there's so many things about Charlie that I mean impacted our culture. His life and his death have there's so many conversations you could have around that. And I think that he was authentic and he was courageous. He knew what he believed and he was not afraid to have open discussions. He would talk to anybody, he would debate. And that is what we say we are about in this country. That's what we claim to be in favor of. And I applaud those who disagree with him. I can't say that I've heard every single word that he's ever spoken or everything. I think he and I probably agree on a lot of things, but the number one thing that he was actually asked this I think a few weeks before his death, and he was asked, what do you want your legacy to be, essentially? And he said, my faith. And just watching everything happen since his passing, that has been probably the biggest impact that I've been able to see on the nation and on the culture is his faith and how he carried out his faith and the fact that he was not a hypocrite, which a lot of people are hypocrites, even if we try not to be. Uh, and he was courageous and he did things in spite of threats. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was killed is because they couldn't shut him down otherwise. But I think that's what is admirable about him. I think he went out there and he did the things that some of us may be afraid to do, and he talked about difficult things. He talked about things that made people uncomfortable, and it makes us uncomfortable to talk about things that make other people uncomfortable. Most of us We want to stay inside our comfort zones. We don't want to make people upset. We don't want to have difficult conversations. Um, so I think that's one of the things that is admirable about him, because I think we need to have more of those conversations respectfully. I don't know if you saw this or not. I just recently saw that he had reached out to Van Jones. They
Hmm.
had been they had been beefing, as Van Jones says, and really kind of going at it online, and Charlie reached out to him and said, "Hey, let's come on the show. Let's have it out and disagree agreeably," is the words I believe he used. And Van Jones, to his credit, came out and said, "Hey, we disagreed on everything, but he was willing to have a conversation and have a debate." And so I think that's one of the most admirable things about him, and that he actually lived his faith and did what he said he was going to do, and he did what he lived out what he said he believed in.
Hmm. You remember where you were when you found out?
I do. I was in my call room at the hospital. I was doing a regular day, and just I do remember the feeling of, because I remember when I heard Trump was shot, and the feeling, the thoughts that were going through my head when I heard Trump was shot was kind of, obviously I was hoping he was okay. Um, I don't want any president or anybody to be assassinated, but I know that when something like that happens, it can be just absolutely disruptive to our peace and our country. And I was concerned about what could happen if he had been killed, uh, with the blowback and just the disruption and turmoil in the country. Fortunately, he was fine. So when my first reaction was kind of, again, hope, and thinking, a lot of times we hear people are shot. There's a lot of people that survive shootings. And then one of my friends sent me a video pretty quickly, pretty early on, and I knew immediately that that was not something that he would ever be able to survive. So, um, that was hard to watch.
Let's unpack that for a second, because for those that may not know you on the show, your background is in um, medical, medical. Um, I'm having a loss of. Um,
Yeah, military medicine, aviation medicine. I've done trauma. I've done, yeah, hospital medicine. I've done a lot of stuff with, but I've also have a background in marksmanship and firearms and things like that too. So, uh, that was a
gosh,
that was a clearly devastating injury. Um, so unfortunately, I did hear Dr. Frank Turk's account of, eventually after a few days he came out and kind of gave an account of what his experience was, and he was in the vehicle with Charlie, and they were trying to resuscitate him, but and of course they took him to surgery, and I imagined that would happen, just trying to do everything, but they're just knowing everything, that the amount of blood lost and the location of the injury, there just really is um, no possible way. I don't think anybody could survive. You could survive a neck wound, but not to the degree that that happened.
what?
Yeah.
Why? What did it? What did it hit? What did it look
Well,
like that it?
I mean, to me, it looked like it hit his carotid, um, but it also looked like it impacted his spine with uh, the way that his body reacted. Looked like there was a spinal cord injury as well. So, without getting too graphic, I want to honor, his life and this moment. But to me, it looked like there was the combination of the the amount of blood that came out in just that 1 second clip. And the fact that a neck injury is very difficult. You can't tourniquet a neck injury, obviously. So holding pressure is relatively futile. Neck injuries are devastating when you impact a major vessel like that. So the amount of blood you can lose from a major vessel in that area is just immense. So he would have he would have lost almost all of his blood by the time he got to the hospital. Especially not having, you know, even if you had the best, most experienced combat medics with all their equipment, it still would have been devastating. And if you add to that the fact that it looks like, and again, I don't have availability to the any of the coroner stuff or anything like that, any of the medical stuff, but it did look like it may have impacted his spine as well. So pretty awful injury.
You know, you on the other side of the coin, from a you've been training and shooting and what at a high level, competing and training and competing and from the military
Yes.
side in firearms for what, decades?
Yeah, a couple decades. Well, I would say I started in 2014, so not so about yeah, almost 12
Decade and a
years.
half almost.
Yeah.
You know, is that something that that did that come across feasible from
Yeah,
a
yeah,
you
and
know
I've seen a lot of the I've seen a I'll get it. We can maybe get into the I don't want to talk about conspiracies because I don't want to give them any airtime, but the some of the crazy theories that were thrown out immediately were just not even feasible. And but I'll get into, was that a feasible shot for somebody like him to take? In my opinion, yes. So 200 yards, we're talking about a 200-yard shot with a 30 caliber rifle and a high power scope. First of all, that shot to his neck was technically a miss. Now I understand that he did hit him and cause a devastating injury, but it's very unlikely he was aiming for the neck. Um, and we'll just say if that wasn't him, if it wasn't the shooter that we've heard about, uh, that was a major miss. So if this was a professional, say, that's a huge miss at 200 yards from a prone position. You A professional is not going to hit him in the neck. He's gonna. I mean, I heard a sniper say, and I like the way he described this. At 200 yards, I can pick which nostril
hmm.
I want to take out. So that's the level of um and these that's the level that a professional would be able to hit. Now, you're talking about most likely the shooter, whoever it was aiming at the head or the chest. So the chest obviously is quite a long distance. At We're talking, most people should be able to shoot within, with a prone with a high power 30-06 or 30 caliber rifle with a high powered scope, should be able to keep it within a minute of angle. That's 2 inches that's a 2 inch radius at 200 yards. So so that's not very big. That's a small cone of fire. So you should still be able to impact where you're aiming. Um, and he didn't. So that's nerves. That's not understanding, how to calculate the bullet drop, maybe from shooting it from an elevated platform. Maybe he, through his shoulder. There's a lot of reasons you may be off, and I don't know where he was aiming, but unlikely that he was aiming at the neck. And if a professional had done it, it would have been a center shot. So that's my opinion based on what I know about marksmanship and the difficulty of that shot. um, we shoot 200 yards standing, which is a very unstable position, and the X ring is about that big. It's about the size of your fist, a little bit bigger. So that's kind of a comparison. In prone at 200 yards, I can put that rifle. Now, I don't know what kind of barrel he had and how good his ammo was and all that stuff. That matters. But I can pretty much put that type of rifle through the same hole at 200 yards prone with a high power scope. So that's kind of the details, in my opinion, on a shot like that. So doesn't sound like a professional shot to me.
And you're in the hospital, you see life, you see death. What, why do you think this has been so painful for the country?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Even as a hospitalist and a doctor and a professional, health professional and a student, and you've had to see devastating things throughout your career or in training.
Mhm. Yeah, so throughout my career, I've seen a lot of death, and it's never it's never easy. It's obviously different circumstances can impact you more than others. If you had asked me, if you had told me this was going to happen, and I asked me like, what do you think your reaction's going to be? I would not have expected it to be what it was. Um, I was very impacted by it. It was, and I had to think about that. I was, I had to really contemplate and ruminate on that of why I had the reaction that I did and why it affected me so much. And initially, it was pretty obvious. I think the thing that got me the most was as a father, seeing his kids and knowing that those little kids will never be able to grow up with their dad around. Uh, that's my biggest fear in life. That is the thing that, I'm most fearful of. And knowing that that happened to his kids was heartbreaking for me. And there was a lot of grief. And that grief kind of alternated with anger and even, I don't want to say rage because I feel like rage is more of an action, more of like a verb, but definitely anger. And I think a lot, what the fascinating thing is I've seen a lot of people that have reacted the same way, that have had a very deep reaction to this all over the country that was unexpected to them. Like they said, I'm having these feelings and I don't understand why this is affecting me so deeply. And I think one of the reasons is just because one of the reasons is because it was so visible. It was most people do not see this kind of death happen like that on video, like a real event. But also, I think there's a spiritual war going on. And I think that this affected us on a spiritual level. And I can't put my finger on it exactly, but I think that was a big part of it. I think there's a lot of people that it just feels very wrong. And so people are offended. Um, but for me, I had to wrestle with that. I had to wrestle with the anger and the feeling of wanting revenge, frankly, if I'm being honest. And I saw it was well, I'll tell you. The very next day after um the very next day after that happened, I think it was September 11th. I get a prayer email every day. It's just, a little prayer, a little Bible verse. Um and it was the words of Jesus, Matthew 5. Um he says, basically, love your enemies, pray for them that curse you and despitefully use you. And that hit me because it conflicted with what I was feeling. I didn't feel like loving, the people that were celebrating his death and the person that did this. And then to top it all off, I saw a little video of a priest, I believe it was, saying we should be hoping that this shooter, this assassin, comes to Christ. And man, that convicted me as well, because I definitely was not feeling those feelings, but I knew that if I believe what I say I believe, then I should be, at least I should be wanting that. I should be wanting him to come to Christ. And so that really caused a tussle in my soul of the feelings of anger and knowing that I should be feeling more, figuring out a way to feel the way that Christ said we should feel. And even he was, not only did he say it, he lived it. He showed us the example. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that's hard. That is hard for us as humans. And it made me realize that that's what Paul is talking about, because that's myself that I have to die to. I have to die to that self that wants revenge and wants to be angry and hate. Um, that is what we're supposed to be dying to. And I, well, let me back up a little bit. I hope you don't. I'm kind of rambling. Um, One of the other the first, what I realized before that was that I was having this idol of, one of the reasons it bothered me so much is because I wanted control. I felt like things are getting out of control. Our country is not going in the direction that I would like it to go. I'm fearful for my family's future, my future, the future of the country. I can't control these things, and I want to. And I think that was a big part of why I was so bothered. And then I realized that Christ does not promise us a good life. He does not promise us wealth or happiness or comfort or ease. In fact, it's the opposite. So why am I putting all this energy and all this emotional energy into worrying about this when Christ says that's not what I promised you? So that made me realize that that's the part that I had to die to. I had to die to that. And once I realized that, it was much easier to get over that anger and want for revenge, because what that was really was about was control.
Mm.
I felt a lack of control. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the evolution of the emotions. And I felt a little bit guilty for a while, and then I was still, heartbroken. It's still a heartbreaking thing to see. And I was reminded of the time where Jesus lost his friend Lazarus. And he was called to where Lazarus was, and he made the journey, and they told him that Lazarus was dead. And even though Jesus knew what was going to happen, he knew he was going to raise Lazarus up. The Bible says that Jesus wept.
Mm.
And I thought, it's okay to feel these emotions. It's okay. That Jesus was our example. A lot of these things in the Bible, they're there to let us know, hey, this this is what you can do. And so Jesus wept for his friend Lazarus because he had a broken heart. And that was reassuring to me because it made me feel better about some of the emotions that I was having. You know, it's okay to have emotions about things that happen during your life, but we need to die daily to that feeling. At least this was my personal conviction, that feeling of needing to have control. Uh, and that was that was liberating for me. I have been a completely different person since then. Just my whole walk of Christianity has been, and I think a lot of people, I mean, you can see the revival happening from his death. There's an awakening going on, a spiritual awakening. People are being drawn to Christ. So yeah, I told you I might get theological, but yeah, that's how it's impacted me personally. And I'm seeing a lot of the same messages from other people, and it's really fascinating.
What would you say, from a leadership standpoint, what lessons can we derive from Charlie?
Well, Charlie was a first he was a leader in his home. You know, he's a father, he was a husband, he led by example, like I mentioned earlier. And I want to point out I didn't know him personally. I knew of him. I've learned more about him since he died. I didn't necessarily follow him that closely. I follow things peripherally, but I wasn't like necessarily um, that um, I wasn't a close friend of his or anything like that. But I'm familiar with him and what he did. I know he was also so he was a leader first in his home, and from everything I can tell, he was an honest man. You know, as far as a leader goes, and he was fair. He treated people with respect. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I believe just from watching. Now, I want to pause here for a second. If if we all had every moment pretty much filmed, especially our moments of debate with people who disagree with us, there's I don't know if there's any of us that would come out flawless, right? Completely with every single word articulated perfectly. Uh, he was he did a pretty good job, I challenge those who've seen clips to go back and watch the entirety and see what the message he was getting across, and not be don't make judgments based on single clips or what other people's opinions are. But I think he was also a pretty good entrepreneur. He grew a business from scratch and did very, very well with that business. He was a good friend from what I can tell. His legacy, when something like this happens to somebody, and you have people that tell stories about, hey, Charlie reached out to me during this time, and when I was nobody, he was there for me. And some of those things, it kind of shows the character that he had. Um, from a leadership perspective, he was very driven. I saw a clip of him talking about how he used to think it was just normal to be that driven that way he was. And then as he became an entrepreneur and a leader, and he started realizing that not everybody is that same way. And so I think he was also, you can see his development and his growth as well. So he was interested in evolving, and whether, what he believed, or, how his approaches to things were. So, I mean, I respect that about him, because I think you can see that throughout his career of, um, whether he changed his approach to something or something that he believed. And I think, I mean, to me, the overarching theme was the way he was able to communicate his faith and his beliefs, and still have those conversations with people that disagree with him in a loving way. In a, I mean, you can watch him on Bill Maher. Like I said, he invited Van Jones. Um, that is something that is sorely lacking in this world right now, and in this country. And I think we can, if we don't take anything else from that, I think we need to have those conversations. We need to have, but we need to have them respectfully and use. It's hard when it's hard to disagree with somebody and not get emotional and not get upset when somebody says something that violates your belief system or your value system. So he was a good example of being able to do that, and I think we need more of that.
There's a Soren Kierkegaard quote. Um, Soren Kierkegaard has played a role uh, in this, at least in my interaction with this horrifying, occur this this tragedy. Um, Actually, his chief, I think it was a chief strategy officer, you shared a quote that I share all the time on the show, and have many episodes. When the tyrant um, dies, his rule is over, and when the martyr dies, his reign begins. Soren Kierkegaard also, depending who you ask, it's Kierkegaard or Kierkegaard. I just want to make sure that's clear. The
A lot of
most
people having
common,
trouble with that name.
yeah, it's a hard name, but the most common form of despair is not becoming who you are. Soren Kierkegaard.
Mm,
I have a speculation. Now, Soren Kierkegaard is saying that he, I think, was a prophet, if there is any such thing. Soren, that is. Um, he was the Socrates of Christendom in the 19th century. Um, he passed midway into the 1800s. Um, he died young. He was like 42. He's a prolific output of these deeply spiritual, philosophical, profound texts, grappling with faith and the analysis of the individual. His whole life was dedicated to questions concerning the individual and faith. Um, and even after his passing, he was given like long after, the designation as like the father of existentialism. But he was a deeply religious philosophical thinker. And so this quote, right? The calmest form of despair is not becoming who you are. One thing that everyone said in one way or another is how inspired or inspiring it was to see Charlie who he was.
mhm.
Like the idea of integrity. He said what he thought, even in the face of the enemy, the enemy, right? As in someone that shares a different belief. You just
Yeah.
said how hard it can be to talk to people and how hard it is that disagree, right? It strikes to the core of our identity. Yet we're called to have the ability and the capacity to have dialogue with those that disagree, to be a functioning person, let alone part of a community, or to have a healthy marriage, constructive marriage, or a patriarchal, matriarchal relationship with our children, or, you know, honoring our elders in the Old Testament, or what. if he was, so where I'm going with this, if the most common form of despair is not becoming who we are, of course it's grieving for a stranger that showed us what it looks like to be who you are, meaning to stand behind your convictions and not only live in a way that you think is the way, but have discourse with those that challenge that way in a loving way. I think there's something to how tragic it is to lose that inspiration, and how, if the most common form of despair is not becoming who we are, of and we're seeing someone actualizing who they are, their destiny, and they're killed in a what the most horrifying way, in the sense that, yeah, we have in front of their children and at work, essentially, with the microphone in their hand. It's like there's multiple meanings here.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah, you said inspiring, um, and it reminded me that that's one of the feelings that I had following all of this was a feeling of inspiration. I think Charlie was inspiring to people, and one of the things was that was inspiring about him was his persistence and his courage and his integrity that kind of puts us to shame a little bit of where, what am I doing, you know so
I absolutely
I think.
identify with that. I do believe that. It's like holding a mirror up.
Mhm,
Where have I been a coward?
yeah,
This guy's over here getting killed. I can't
exactly,
look at myself and say, where am I not showing up?
yeah,
That could be overwhelming for people to face.
yeah. And I think the overwhelming feelings is is one of the things that's turning people to faith,
Hmm.
because when we're comfortable, we don't seek the Lord necessarily. But when we feel overwhelmed and we don't know where to turn, then a lot of people will turn to God and seek faith. And that was the duality of who Charlie Kirk was, right? That was, you know, in his death, he not only lived his faith, but then in his death, he was able to kind of, like you said, hold that mirror up and help us find the find the answer, um, that we might not have sought otherwise.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I don't think it's civil war. I think there's a lot of people that maybe feel. I'm actually really happy that the reaction has been what it has been for the most part. I was very actually relieved. Um, I think we I think we have to. I'm not saying go to work and just, you know, don't work and just have all these conversations and argue with people. One of the things I like to say, and I don't know how correct this is, was my way of saying it, is we should argue but not fight. And, I say that about like a couple, like a marriage. like we should have a debate about things. Like we're not the same person. We're going to have different viewpoints on things. So let's let's talk about it. Let's work it out, right? You give your opinion, I give my view, and we argue per se, right? But we should be able to do that without fighting and with respecting each other and with empathy, frankly, and trying to see where the other person's coming from. And I don't think there's as much, there's obviously far extremes, but I don't think I have a lot of friends that are kind of all over the place, and different viewpoints on things. And you really sit down and talk to people, you're not that far off, really, for the most part. Um, it's just a lot of times it's the polarization that we get fed, um, and we end up thinking that people that disagree with us are monsters, and they think we're monsters. And if we don't talk to each other, at some point, um, then we end up going around thinking half of our country are monsters, and I don't think that's the case. Um, so I do think we have to find a way to have conversations, and maybe it's not every single person has to have a conversation, but um, you know, we do need to have public discord and or discourse. And there are people that do that, as they're doing it on television, they're doing it on podcasts. There are people that do that, and that's what they do. I'm not saying like everybody has to, like I said, go to work and just sit there and talk about politics the whole day. Um, but we have to stop saying things like speech is violence, and we have to stop demonizing people that don't agree with us. We should try to figure out, why do they, be a little curious. Maybe curiosity would go a long way. Like, why, why do they believe that way? Um, I'm not saying there's no right and wrong, because there is a right and wrong, and there is evil out there. There's no doubt about that, and we should be willing and to stand up to it. Um, and Charlie Kirk did that. But we do need to have the ability to have conversations. I don't think shutting down speech is the way to go. Um, so that's kind of, I think we take his legacy of faith and speech and discourse, uh, and we should try to amplify that, and kind of like we were talking about earlier, and try to apply it to our own lives, and take it as an inspiration to be a little bit
Mm.
um, more courageous in our own lives. That's what I've tried to
Char-
do, and seek the Christ-like way to react to things.
it's been an honor having you. Charlie was 31. He, what, he had a son, pretty, what, few months old, a daughter, born in 22, I think. Erica Kirk, what they met 2018. She tried to intern or get a job at the company. I think in 2012, he started Turning Point. One chapter led to 250 talks a year, at least 200 universities, at least 1,000 churches, multiple books. And mother was a trader in Chicago, I think, turned mental health professional. Father was an architect. Didn't get into West Point, starts this nonprofit. I've talked to numerous adolescents in college about what he meant to them or represented for them. And it was so much bigger than political. It's part of the
Mhm.
reason we're honoring him on the Culture Matters podcast is at some point he realized the importance of culture and how culture and the state
Mm.
of culture influences the political discourse, the political construct. So, David, thank you for coming on the Culture Matters podcast and sharing your thoughts and faith with us. If you're listening to this, please share this with an enemy. And we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.
Thanks for having me.